Kathy, you want to call the roll?
Sure. Chair Chang, we know he's not here yet. Board Member Calavita,
Here.
Board Member Leftwich,
Here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And Public Member Kit Sagamore.
Here.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We have quorum.
Also present is Lieutenant Montgomery from the Berkeley Police Department. And next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second it.
So hearing no objections, the agenda is approved by consent. And next is public comment. I don't believe there are any members of the public here, are there?
Yeah, I see one member. I see Scott Castle. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Okay. Does not look like he wishes to speak.
So no public comment at this time. So we'll move on to old business, which is continuing discussion of the permanent regulations for the board to include consideration of ideas that we had previously considered, as well as new items. Kathy, I think you said that we have, last time we stopped at, we had finished letter I.
Yes,
Hearing procedures.
except that we were going to go back to 2E5, and that had to do with how to handle findings and recommendations and when they would go to a hearing. So we could do that, or we actually stopped. Well, staff was supposed to come back with language for 2E5, and that is in the document for today. But then you proceeded at the last meeting, and then you got through I, and then moved to informal complaints.
Okay, so let's go. I'm not seeing exactly where you're talking about. Staff added. Is this page 6 of the agenda?
No, it's on page 9 of the next draft, section 2E5.
Okay.
I can pull it up too. Let me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you share your screen?
Yes, it'd be helpful.
Yes.
So all of this, okay. Is this page 6 of the agenda?
No.
It looks like Mike Chang has joined us.
Okay. Oh, wait, hang on. I'm getting that feedback.
Yeah, we have an echo.
I can pull it up too. Yeah. Sorry. Wait, hang on. I'm trying to stop this. Now I can't find the. Okay, are you guys seeing?
I
Okay,
see it on
thank you.
page 9 of the agenda.
9.
I'm getting that.
No, we have an echo.
Yes. So can you see this? Can you
Yes,
see
so
section 5?
Yes, all that red, all that
You look
red.
at that while I try to take care of this echo. Okay, I think I took care of the echo. I don't know what happened to my screen share. Okay, what is everybody seeing now?
No, that's right.
That section.
You've got
You're
it.
seeing it? Okay.
Yes.
Top of page 9.
I can't, oh, there it is. Okay, I found it. Sorry, all these windows open. All right.
Yeah.
So this was to add a hearing when there is a proposed sustained finding.
Right. So at the top here is what we were talking about at the last meeting. And we had a lot of discussion, you may remember, and we had some people were disagreeing about when things should go to hearing. And then we landed on, how about if there's a sustained finding, then then there's a hearing. So this is what I wrote up for people.
Just
to-
wondering, I
Uh-huh.
like that, but I'm wondering if there should be a hearing on all allegations. If there's just, say there's 5 and there's only a proposed sustained finding on one of them. I don't know if Lieutenant Montgomery has any thoughts, but I'm just wondering if we'd need a hearing on all allegations or just those that are sustained.
That's the language that I just highlighted, right?
Right.
Yeah. I had a conversation with Byron about it, and I thought he made a good point that is escaping me. Do you remember?
Yes, the point I made was that once the board decides that a hearing is warranted, I think it would be beneficial for everyone, for the board to have the ability to change course on any of those allegations based on information received at the hearing, particularly
Right.
on allegations where there could be some overlap or between the recommended sustained allegation and the other allegations. I just
Got it.
didn't know if it would, and I would like to hear what Lieutenant Montgomery thinks of this, but I didn't want to lock the board in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would be, as far as workload, expeditious to just handle the complaint. I think you might find yourself going back and forth, which, sort of suggesting that there's not going to be a hearing on this particular allegation, and then all of a sudden we're knee deep into it. It'll also, I think, help the complainant and their representative prepare, if they just prepare for the complaint, the whole complaint. But I mean, obviously, if you were doing a big volume of cases, it might be an advantage to not have to tackle every prong of a complaint. But
Yeah, it would definitely be easier and convenient. Maybe it's something the board could determine at the time it decides whether to move forward. Or we could try it this way, just limit it to those cases where there's a recommended sustained allegation, and then we could always come back and make changes if it seems like it's, too limited.
I agree that it would be awkward to pull out one of the allegations and only have a hearing on that. I think we should just do the hearing.
Yeah.
So
what if I'm playing the opposite fiddle there? What if something was just proven factually incorrect or no merit, sort of something that you would ordinarily summary dismiss?
you mean as one of several allegations?
Yeah, like let's say there's 5 allegations. One of them just, the investigation shows there's no merit to it whatsoever, but the other ones are sort of worth discussion. How would you look at that?
I just feel like we'll do a hearing the way we normally do a hearing, and that is, we would dismiss that one when it came time as well. But rather than pull out pieces, I think we should just have a hearing the way we've had hearings. It just seems less awkward, and if there's something that's totally without merit, then that'll just be unfounded as a result of the hearing.
I agree with that.
I wanted to, if we're finished with this, I wanted to talk about the difference between B and C.
So let me jump in on A.
Okay.
I'm honestly not sure how I really feel about it. Part of me feels like if the staff comes in and let's say there's 5 complaints, and out of the 5, 3 of them the board agrees with, and they're not sustained findings. Part of me thinks that okay, we've moved past that.
Mhm.
And now we're really only focused on the two things that really are in question. And I would think that as we're doing the hearing, those are the things that we're going to focus on. It's not the other stuff, because we've already agreed that, you know, that they're not sustained findings or whatever. So to me, at the hearing, the focus is going to be on those things that we have, either we feel like we need more information or there's some sort of disagreement. But at the same time, so I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth now. At the same time, I can also see that we get in the hearing and we hear something that would actually potentially change one of the other three items that we thought we were done with. I could, you know, I don't know if I actually would see that happening. The probability of that happening, I think, would be kind of low. So I think I think I'm talking to myself into, we only do the hearing on the sustained stuff. That's it.
You know
What
what
if
we
you-
could do? I'm kind of on the fence about it too. I could kind of go either way. Maybe this is one of those items that, since those of us, you know, there's some differing opinions here, that we just note the issue and bring it back to the full board.
We could do that. I'd like to hear, I mean, I guess it was you, Byron, that thought it would be simpler to just convene a hearing on the allegations and not single out the ones that might be sustained. Could we hear you talk about that?
Not necessarily simpler. I was just thinking that, and I'm on the fence. I could go either way on this as well. I was just thinking that there could be a situation where the board could convene a hearing on 2 out of 5 allegations, and out of that hearing comes some new information that could that sheds more light on one of the allegations that the board decided not to hear. That could, yeah, but again, I don't feel super strongly about it. I'm on the fence. I do think Lieutenant Montgomery, he does have a point, and Kathy and I considered this. It would be easier if we just know what the simplest thing would just say, okay, this is all that we're going to have this hearing on, and that's easy. That's real easy. So I do see the definite pros if we moved in that direction.
Yeah, I think you would do that. I think in the cases where it was like the obvious ones, you know, if it were less than obvious, you might not. You might think it needs to go to hearing. I don't know.
And actually, now that I'm thinking about it even further, I guess I am leaning towards just having the board just convene the hearing on those allegations that it determines, I guess, sustained allegations. I guess it would be the simplest thing. And again, we can always come back and revisit this in a year or so.
Ms. Sagamore has her hand raised.
Kit, go ahead.
I'm just thinking in terms of, you know, Lieutenant Montgomery talked about the folks preparing to come to the hearing, that on the one hand, it's very helpful to know which allegations you're preparing for rather than going in there for the whole thing when in fact that's not the part that's necessary. But if you are going to do that, then it seems to me that you wouldn't want to say, well, once we get in there and open the hearing, we could go back and revisit the other parts, because you haven't, you've given people information that this is what they're going to be working on and not the whole thing. I'm thinking of, from what I've heard, I've never been audited by the IRS, but my understanding is that if you're audited by the IRS, they tell you, you know, we're auditing, you know, line 45, and that's the only thing you have to prepare. And then they're not allowed to ask about everything else on your form. I don't know if that's true, but it is, the hearing is limited, the audit in that case is limited to just that question. That's just my thinking about what's going to be fairest.
On some level, we have been represented and prepared for all the allegations at the sort of investigation stage. So it's not like we're going to be blindsided by the new, or by the ones that aren't excluded.
But the reality is, if we're saying that, you know, there's a couple items that are sustained and we are taking the other items off the table, I mean, like I said, when we do the hearing, we're going to be focused on those things that are sustained, and that's where our attention is going to be. And honestly, that allows the officer as well as the complainant to focus on those items that we know are the focus of the board, because you know what I mean? Because those are the items that are the focus of the board. If we leave this other stuff out there that we're really not focused on, and then all of a sudden turn and say, oh, well, hey, wait a minute, let's turn around and go back and look, then that really doesn't give neither the complainant or the officer kind of a focused thing to prepare for. Because now it's like, even though we're saying it's non-sustained, the other items, you know, whatever category it falls in, now all of a sudden we bring it up during the hearing. I think we have, for me, I think I just got to put a stake in the ground. And if we say, you know, when it's first presented to us that, you know, 3 of those items are not sustained, I think we just have to live with them.
Mhm.
And
So that was my original thinking when I raised this, that why is it all? But then when I heard Kitty and Byron, as I said, I could kind of see it. I could still kind of see it both ways, because some of the allegations might be related, you know, so maybe it's not as easy to slice and dice all of them. Sometimes you can do that, but maybe it's harder factually, you know, you're still going to be talking about the same events, you know, whether they led to.
They could be related, but now that but the fact that we're only going forward on sustained allegation, I guess the more I think about this, that mitigates the need to have a hearing, I guess, on all allegations. I was thinking of a situation where, you know, you could have a negative ruling on an officer, and you know, the board decides to move forward on a hearing on just one of those negative rulings, but an officer doesn't have the opportunity to speak to or present evidence at the hearing on that other allegation, but we're only talking about sustained allegations going forward.
Mhm.
Well,
So
hang on. I don't know if this is in B, C, or D, which probably is, but let's say we've got 5 allegations. 2 of them are sustained. So we know we're going to do a hearing on those. So those are kind of off the table. We know what we're going to do with those. Let's say 2 of them, we agree with what the staff brings to us. But let's say on that 5th one, the staff says, you know, unfounded, and we think it may be something else. So that 5th one, so we have a disagreement. That 5th one, we're going to want to have a hearing because there's a disagreement. So there's a potential that we agree with a couple of them that you guys say. There's 2 that are sustained, and we agree with the sustained, so we're going to go forward with a hearing with that. And then the 5th one, there's a potential that we disagree. And we need a hearing because we disagree on that particular item. So it's not just, does that make sense?
Do we need a hearing if we disagree on non-sustained? I think we are moving away from that, right?
But if the board thinks it should be, oh, you're saying if nobody thinks it should be sustained.
Well, if there's a disagreement on an allegation that's not a sustained finding, and the board's decision trumps.
Can I offer a little bit of rephrasing?
Yeah.
So like at that point, there's a finding or a recommendation that those might be violations that might be sustained. I think you would be saying, the question being asked is not, should we sustain or not sustain? The question should be, do I need more information from a hearing in order, do I think it's likely that this could result in discipline, and is a hearing warranted on this item, on this particular recommendation? Because there's a little bit of a kind of a process problem that I'm hearing when it seems like the mind is being made up prior to the hearing, like the sort of the judicial oversight aspect or the quasi-judicial ruling is being made up in those intermediate steps. And there's some questions coming up too about when presentation of evidence ought to happen.
We had that kind of wording before about if the board, if further fact finding, you know, you see up above there.
Yeah,
So
I guess I would just say,
concept.
Yeah, I would say something to the way we've been talking about, we've been sort of saying, when the DPA comes with this information, it's sustained. And I would say, no, you got to report with recommendations and findings. And at the only way it could be sustained is after a hearing. Does that make sense? So that we're not making up our mind at the juncture about whether or not we need a hearing. Does that make sense?
But the way
Yes,
it's
yeah.
set up, the way the law is set up is it is kind of like that two-step procedure. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that is kind of the way it's written, right?
Well, yeah, because
Yeah,
the staff brings, so the staff has to bring us finding and recommendations. When they bring us recommendations, their recommendation is sustained, unfounded, blah, blah, blah. So they are making that recommendation of sustained. So it's not a decision, it's a recommendation. So I get
Right.
what you're saying, but
So the board just the idea, I mean, it's just kind of, we're talking this out, and I know I'm being sort of picky about the words, but there's certain thing about where the officers, there's a concern, kind of a fairness concern out there of like, if we're presenting all the evidence at that juncture and minds are all made up at that juncture, that's not where we want that to happen. We want to happen with the officer represented, present, answering questions, et cetera. And so to me, it's just answering that one question based on the findings and recommendations from the DPA. Can we dismiss, unfound, not sustain this based on believing that, or do we need a hearing to consider it? Another finding.
So then what you're saying is we need a hearing for everything, because if they come to us and say it's unfounded, from what you're describing, they would be totally okay with that, because that is a finding. So you're saying if
I'm talking about,
that-
so yeah, let's go back to what I'm talking about when we talked about last week is, if you're looking at this and you're saying there's an adverse finding, a finding of sustained, a sustained complaint, then there ought to be a hearing. But if you're saying this is being dismissed, or we agree and it's unfounded, I don't think anybody thinks they need a hearing over that. Does that make sense?
You
Right.
kind of want to have your cake and eat it too. It sounds like you don't want the board to make a judicial finding, but if they make a negative one, then there's a hearing. So
Make no mistake, the officers are very concerned about due process on adverse findings.
Right.
So,
no, I get that, but
yeah. So
And
it
that
is the
concern
adverse
is
findings
that-
that are concerning.
And that's
Right,
what
so-
we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. And
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, and it's really on the board's judgment on the merits based on what is recommended. There, like I said, and I do want to bring up, and I don't know when to shoehorn in the discussion, is when the presentation of evidence happens and what that does to a sort of a commissioner or commissioners not involved in the hearing, if it's presented at the wrong time in the process, or if it's presented at a time that biases the process. So I kind of want to talk about that at some point too.
But I think that I hear what you're saying, but I think that, so the way the process is set up is the staff brings us finding and recommendation. So that there's already built into this process that there is a semi decision made, because it's a recommendation. It is not a in stone, here's what it is. It is a recommendation from the staff as to what the board is going to do. That's in the charter. So that we can't get around. There has to be some, that's just guidance for us. That doesn't mean that that's what we're gonna do,
Sure.
but that's guidance.
And I'm not suggesting that step doesn't happen. I think there's a one case, without going into the facts of the case, there was a case that came to that step for finding and recommendations, and then body worn camera video was shown, and the case was sort of reopened in contradiction to the findings and recommendations on new allegations from the board to have more investigation. And all the commissioners were exposed to that body worn camera video, and then a subset of those who had already seen it, who basically evidence was presented at that juncture, were now going to potentially sit on a board. And they sat on the board. And so the question there is, should the people making the decision about whether or not there should be a hearing be the same commissioners sitting on the hearing itself?
But that's
the
just
evidence
the
is
way
presented.
I don't think there's any way around that. I mean,
Right.
I didn't write that. I wouldn't have written a lot of this the way it's written, But I don't think there's any way around that.
I think
Whoever
Julie's
came up
right
with
on
this,
that. That's what
whoever
the
came up with
process is.
this scheme, that's the way it is. So
That's what the charter says.
So,
So,
right,
but
let me ask you a question, and not to say that I've thought of the perfect answer, but what if the subset were the other direction? A subset of 3 board members gets presented the finding and recommendations and decides whether there's going to be a hearing, and then second subset actually conducts the hearing, as opposed to all 9 hearing, being exposed to, but not all of the facts of the case. And then,
I don't think the charter allows that.
no, I don't think so either.
the board decides whether there should be a hearing.
The DPA has to present findings and recommendations to the board.
yeah, it's a concern that keeps coming up, like how that whole, it's a new mechanism for us, right? Before there wasn't really a preliminary hearing,
Right.
some got dismissed, they all went to board. And so there's some struggles over like, hey, wait a minute, it feels like minds were made up because they said, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, or conclusions were drawn
I
at that
think we
juncture.
understand what you're saying, Dan. It's just that, as Julie said, that's just how the charter's written, unfortunately.
Mhm.
I'm not a fan of the process, but
Mhm.
there's some
And then-
things we just can't get around.
In any case, like you said, Lieutenant, the hearing is not to hear something that people have already decided. It's to do further fact finding. And in an effort to give due process to those that look like they might be sustained, we've decided that, like you suggested, it would be good to have a hearing on those. So I actually think that it would be much cleaner to follow what it says here under A and just have the hearing on all the allegations like our hearings have been in the past. Because like Cheryl, I think it was Cheryl brought up, you might have 2 out of 5 that look like they might be sustained, but there might be a third one that people feel they need more fact finding on. And so it becomes like, a menu. I'll take 2 of those and 1 of those. And, I just feel like we should just have the hearing. And that would accommodate both the ones that look like they might be sustained and the ones where it's really confusing and we'd like to have a hearing.
How about if we added some words to A? So it's, if the board affirms or proposes a sustained finding or recommendation of discipline on any allegation, or if further or finds that further fact finding is required, comma, a confidential complaint.
Well, shall be convened on all allegations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I,
well,
I felt like we were like, now we've blurred 2 issues. I felt like we were on track on the hearing for some of the allegations. I liked where that was going. I don't want to have that blur with the other issue, the second issue about presentation of evidence at that preliminary aspect, that preliminary kind of hearing.
Well,
I think
But we
I
might-
think it's out. You guys had me convinced there for a minute. Although
Well,
I see both sides of the issue.
we're not talking about the presentation of some evidence at that initial stage is built into the charter. So we're not really talking about whether we're going to do that, right?
Yeah,
I
so
mean-
Right.
setting that aside, don't let that ruin a good thing with the hearing and the allegations, if that makes sense. But that
I don't-
concern, I didn't want to inject that concern and throw us off our game.
No,
I think-
I'm not thinking about that, but it just seemed to me that what Julie was proposing would solve both the question of, there might be some, let's say the staff recommends a sustaining on one of several complaint allegations. And we tend to agree, but then we convene a hearing. But there might also be one of those allegations that we disagree with the staff, or we're undecided amongst ourselves whether there, you know, I would include that. I just think it's cleaner to just have a hearing on the allegations and not single out a couple, because that's a completely different type of hearing than we've had in the past, or that the rest of this document seems to be considering.
I agree with Kitty.
I mean, if we're gonna single out just two of the allegations to have a hearing about, some of the rest of this document would have to be revised, because that would be a different type of hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, if the concern is that a decision is being made prior to the formal hearing, because when the recommendations are brought to us, then that would mean all of the allegations that are brought forth, there should be that same concern for those allegations that are not sustained.
Right.
If you're concerned about the allegation being sustained, and there's a problem with, oh, we might have prejudged, then it goes for all of the allegations. You can't have it that we're only concerned about the ones that are sustained, but we're okay with you making a decision up front on those that aren't. You can't have it both ways. It's got to be, if that's the concern, then all of them have to go to a hearing.
Yeah, definitely the concern is the potential for an adverse finding. So something that could bring
Without a hearing.
without a hearing. It's not the board making decisions or the DPA making recommendations. It's not the main issue. The issue is the potential for an adverse finding. And if you're dismissing it or unfounding it or not sustaining it, there's no potential for an adverse finding for that decision.
Right,
So
we
that's
understand.
that's how I see it as
Yeah.
different, but I see your point.
We
I think
understand.
A is good the way it is. I wanted to add one sentence though to A. And that is, the board may request that ODPA staff conduct additional investigation as needed. Especially if we're talking about further fact finding. And again, this could cut both ways. What if we see body worn camera footage during the director's presentation, and we see somebody in the background said, that officer he was perfect. There was no misconduct here, yet that person wasn't interviewed, and it's exculpatory. I feel very strongly that we need to have the ability to, even though I know there's been some arguments, well, that's not your lane and it's closed. I just think it's very important that if something comes up, that we're able to request that staff conduct further investigation.
Okay, I agree, Julie, but can we put that aside for the moment and decide whether we're going to insert the words that you suggested?
I like that, because I think it is another possibility that we decide a hearing for further fact finding, which was in the original, a prior draft.
Okay, so if the board affirms or proposes a sustained finding or a recommendation on any allegation, or decides that further fact finding is warranted,
Yeah.
a confidential complaint hearing shall be convened on all allegations in the complaint, right?
Right.
Okay.
So really what you're saying is there won't be any split cases. There may be cases that get dismissed or unfounded at that juncture, but there won't be split cases.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of cases that are unfounded or not sustained. Either the staff recommends that way or the board finds that way, and then there'd be no hearing. Right? But if there's the possibility of a sustained finding, or if further fact finding is needed, we'd have a hearing. That's what you had requested, right, Lieutenant? Initially?
Yeah, that feels right. Yeah, and that's a big concern for officers. I'm hearing.
Okay, so we got that. I wonder, Julie, if your idea about additional, I'm not sure that idea goes right here.
Wait, can we just the phrase that was added, or decides that further fact finding is warranted. Now that's, you put in, and you bracketed that between two parens, two commas. So what does that mean by itself? Because you have the first part of the sentence that says, if there's a sustained finding, then you have this or situation, or
Right,
decides.
it's two different
What does that mean?
scenarios.
What does it mean though?
I think it
Well,
means that
say
a
we
hearing
watched-
is warranted. You're just saying that a
Right.
hearing is needed, right?
Because we just need more information. What if the board says, you know, I can't decide. I don't have enough information. I'd like to, you know, hear more. I want to talk to the officer.
I
I
guess-
want to talk to the complainant.
Yeah, I actually had that with one of the hearings that I was on. That I wanted a hearing because I wanted more information. I didn't know if what was shown to the entire board was enough for me to make a decision. So I wanted a hearing because I wanted further fact finding, because I wanted more information.
I understand that. So what you're saying is, it's just for my clarity. So what you're saying is the board can hold a hearing if there's at least one sustained finding, or in cases where there's no sustained finding, they just want further fact finding.
Right.
I just want to be
Okay.
clear. Okay.
Yeah, because we're not sure with the information that's presented, we're not sure if we can agree or disagree with what the staff recommends.
Right.
Okay.
I think,
I
yeah,
got it.
okay. So my question was whether Julie's idea of asking for further, some further specific investigation on the part of the staff before a hearing, in preparation for a hearing, would go here or elsewhere, and whether we want it at all. I mean, we need to,
Right.
Kind of like it here, because here we're talking about a need for further fact finding. I don't know. I think it goes here.
Is
Well,
my-
I want to raise that the charter contemplates that the investigation is done when we bring you the findings and recommendations. So that's why I'm a little,
No, I know, but also in the charter amendment, it says that that the board's purposes is to provide a means for prompt, impartial, and fair investigation of complaints. So it contemplates that the board itself is involved in investigation.
No, we discussed this at the last meeting. I think what that means is that the board creates the process, the complaint process, which is what you guys are doing now. But that's different role from conducting the investigations. The charter.
And
is
what
clear.
if though, what if there's some evidence that completely clears an officer of wrongdoing? This isn't something that I'm proposing just because I think it'll help complainants. It just will help with us being objective fact finders.
So
I don't think it makes sense to say, sorry, too late, even though that witness, that's completely exculpatory evidence. And if we hear from that witness, we're gonna say these allegations are unfounded. So I don't think it's logical to say we can't, too late.
could I offer a compromise? Could I offer one
Wait.
possibility?
let me ask a question before you offer your compromise, Kitty. Let me clarify something. When we say further fact finding is warranted, we're not saying the board is going to do the investigation. We're saying we're going to send the staff back. We have some questions that we're going to send the staff back to bring back to us during the hearing.
Oh,
So-
I thought further fact finding was only in reference to conducting fact finding at a hearing, not extending.
Not
the investi-
necessarily. I mean,
Okay, so we have an issue.
So that is a major issue for several reasons. It has to do with, noticing the officers early on, officers being represented and interviewed, the timetables. I think the whole notion of sort of instigating new investigations from the DPA at that juncture, you're probably 180 days in or close to it. I mean, you're pretty far in. That is a very problematic
another-
deal. I'm not
We
even sure it
talked
can
about
be
this
done.
at the last meeting.
And
I
the
don't-
department then has to double back and investigate those matters if they hadn't already it's pretty problematic.
Yeah, I think that at least I understood further fact finding to mean being able to question the officer and the complainant at the hearing, not that we would send staff, ask staff to go back and do further investigation. That's not what I understood.
But what about the scenario that I raised where
Let me
there's
just,
somebody off camera in the body worn camera
I
footage?
get it. Let me offer a suggestion.
Okay,
And that is that, the charter makes it absolutely clear that the board can issue subpoenas for the presence of people at hearings implied. So how about, I'm not in favor of asking the staff to go back and continue investigation. Like Lieutenant says, we have timelines, they've done their investigation. But if it turns out that there is a potential witness on camera who hasn't been interviewed, that the board could subpoena their presence at the hearing.
okay. Well, that was I originally had that in there as well, that the board may issue subpoenas in accordance with section, whatever other section it is, KI or something.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I hear what you're saying.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate on this. So let's say the board decides, hey, we're going to subpoena, Sue Smith. And so we subpoena Sue Smith. Now the officer doesn't know anything about Sue Smith, what Sue Smith, because on everybody else, we've got an investigation, there's a transcript, officer gets that information. Now we're bringing in Sue Smith. The officer has really kind of no idea why we're bringing in Sue Smith. Doesn't know what Sue Smith is going to say. You know what I mean? So they're not getting like heads up as to what this potential new person is bringing to the table. So I kind of see that honestly as problematic in the sense that with everything else, when there's any other people that the staff has investigated, there's a transcript of that, the officer gets that, they can read through it prior to the hearing, blah, 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 blah. But now we're bringing in this person off to the side that there's no transcript, there's no nothing. So now the officer, clearly you can notify the officer that Sue Smith's going to be at the hearing, but he has no idea why or what that person is bringing or how to prepare for that person.
Well, that's
I kind of see that as problematic.
I think that's a good point. But again, what if the evidence is crucial? Let's assume it's dispositive and it's exculpatory. So there must be some way, because I hear what you're saying,
Well,
Chair.
Julie,
I agree with that.
You're trying to solve a problem that just does not exist.
That's
And-
the way you draft legislation. I did it for
but-
20 years. You
but-
envision different scenarios.
The job of staff, and this is staff even after Kathy and I are no longer here, is to conduct full, thorough investigations. If that happens, that's another issue. That's another issue. If the staff is bringing you incomplete investigations, that doesn't happen. That's not going to happen.
You don't know who your successor is going to be.
I know, but then let's change the regulations then, but we'll never get off this section. And we imagine every
Nothing would,
scenario.
I don't think anything would stop you, Julie, from considering what you saw on the video or taking that into account in your decision making. And nothing would stop the officer from using that as part of their explanation or their representative for bringing that up and making that point to you either. So, the information is never going to be perfect. If you got a quality investigation, it should capture most witnesses if possible.
So for me,
Yes, I totally hear what Cheryl and Byron and Lieutenant are saying. I guess, in section 3A5, the beginning of the charter, it talks about the board exercising the power of subpoena to compel attendance. And I guess I don't understand in what context that would be feasible. What is it talking about? If it's not talking about this, I don't know what it's talking about. It's
Right.
talking about compelling the attendance of people at a
Well,
hearing.
But it talks about to access records of city departments, compel attendance of sworn employees,
Exactly.
and exercise the power of subpoena as necessary to carry out its function. But that power of
Right.
subpoena could be for documents.
It could be for policy investigations, general, just, in general, what the board can do. Also, again,
I
we
will
don't
say-
know why it was there.
Well, I
Anyway,
guess I'm
Great,
focusing
Chair.
on compel attendance, the compel attendance part of it.
Right.
What are they referring to? Compel the attendance of whom for what?
It says compel
says
the attendance of sworn employees.
employees
That's
of the
what it
police
says.
department.
Compel the attendance of sworn employees. That's specifically what the charter says.
So
So
in the
that's
past, the
who-
PRC could not. The PRC
Okay.
requested the chief to compel the officers. And
Right.
now the
So that's the who.
PAB does it.
Right, I understand that. So what if we want to compel the attendance of an officer who has not been interviewed?
same issue.
I still say that I don't think that it's fair that we bring in someone to interview them during the hearing,
Yeah,
to ask questions, that the officer has not had a chance to be aware of what that person's bringing to the table or anything like that. My guess is, and I could be 100% wrong, but my guess is the thing that potentially would make us feel like we want to talk to somebody is that body worn camera video. And I think we have to live with what's on that video and make whatever's on that video. I think that's what we have to live with.
okay, and I understand completely what you're saying about fairness to the officer. I was, struggling with whether there would be some way to do it in a way that would be fair, but I don't see how it would.
Well-
So,
Again, if it's exculpatory, the officer would like it.
yes, I know, but it may be, it may not be.
Right. If-
I'm
if
just
you're
saying, in
gonna-
all instances, it's not going to be prejudicial to the officer. It's
No.
just
Yeah,
evidence.
but here's the thing, they don't know that. Because they don't know
Right.
what the person's bringing to the table.
No,
So they
I-
don't know if the person is there to support or so they won't have anything to prepare.
No,
for.
I hear you. That's a good point, but maybe there's some way to deal with that issue, but that's a good issue. I mean, I hear you.
I
So
say,
from the perspective of an officer, although I appreciate your point that it would sometimes would be exculpatory, I think the perspective of the officer is more interested in sort of this thing going in a forward direction, not doubling back for more allegations, doubling back, it's like,
or being,
it becomes really problematic. I mean, there's all these noticing requirements. Information has to be presented to the officers. I think it's a 14-day timeline for new witnesses. I think the officer's bigger concern is not what you're talking about, Julie. It's the process.
right.
The other thing too, I think Byron makes a good point. If we find that we have that issue, that there are, we see things in the body worn camera video or something that we read in the transcripts or whatever, and the staff has not done a proper investigation, so they haven't asked questions of whomever, then we have an issue with staff. I agree with Byron on that one.
All right.
That's not helpful. We may have an issue with staff, but that doesn't help us acting, in our quasi judicial role, just because staff didn't do a good job.
I think I hear that we're leaning towards not having this, further investigation added, but I would propose that this be brought up. We're going to have a full discussion of this at the full PAB.
Yeah.
And I propose that this is one of the things that we pin for discussion.
Yeah, I agree. It's complicated.
Because it's messy, it's complicated. We want it to be predictable for the officer and so forth. So let's pin that and see if we can move on.
Let's move on, but Ms. Saginaw has had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see. Okay, go ahead.
I spoke a long time ago. I forgot to take my hand back down.
Okay, that's even easier.
Okay, so
I have
Kathy, what?
had
I-
a couple of other things in this section. I don't know, Kitty should,
yes,
not
I
in
did-
this section, in section 5.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, okay. You want to go ahead?
Well, I was wondering, we have, so if the board disagrees with the director's findings or recommendations, and none of the findings are sustained, and there's no need for a hearing, the director will send the board's recommendations to the chief. Is that what this means? When you say the modified findings?
Are you in C? I was
B.
looking at B.
C, sorry,
I'm sorry, B,
C.
C, okay. Yes, they would be the board's findings.
Okay, so shall we say the director shall send the board's findings to the chief of police? I don't know, modified might be a little confusing.
Oh, okay.
So
I
I'm
see what you're
confused.
saying.
I'm confused, Kathy, because I thought you said before that if there's a disagreement, so we basically modify what you guys recommend. So that to me is a disagreement. I thought you said the chief actually gets the original findings and recommendation plus what the board has decided. I thought you said both went to him.
No,
I heard
But
that.
at a hearing that happens, right? Didn't you say that? I remember you saying that.
well- okay.
At one point, that was the idea.
I might have raised that concept, but I think the
Well,
consensus was,
once the board weighs in at this juncture, you don't want two different
Right.
decisions going. It's the board's findings and recommendations, modified findings and recommendations at that point.
but the
Here's the
issue
thing.
I had,
But here's the thing in the charter for hearings, so section, let's see what it is. Section 18, J2. Yeah, J2. If the board modifies and rejects the findings and recommendation of the Director of Police Accountability, it shall issue a written explanation for its decision and shall forward it to the chief. So to me, that was saying that they both go forward, but we just say why we disagree.
That's after
No.
a hearing.
No,
I
I
was
understand, I
reading that-
understand that, I understand that. So that's why I thought even prior to the hearing, if we had it, because we were talking about this the last time, we had a disagreement. I thought everything went, that your original findings and recommendation plus what we finally landed on. No?
No, no.
similar to that point, what Cheryl just read, it says that the board sends the findings to the chief of police. So I don't think it's right that the director sends it either in B or C.
Well,
And so maybe we should be the chair of the board, but it's, the charter amendment says in 2 different places that it's the board.
But the director sends it on behalf of the
right,
board.
it's
We
on
do.
behalf
We're
of
your
the
office.
board.
That's the way they all, I mean, whatever letters or whatever we send come from the director.
Okay, but that raises another issue about us not seeing what is sent, but I'll raise that later on. I think it's problematic when it just comes from the director and not from the board.
I think it's signed by the chair of the board.
It comes from
Well,
the board.
it's not, but maybe it should be. I mean,
I think it should be.
I'm open to that if that's what the charter says.
Because, I mean, if you look on the top of page 9 of the charter, subsection H, the director of police accountability shall present the results of their investigative findings and recommendations to the police accountability board, who shall make a recommendation to the chief of police regarding the specific complaint. So I read that as it comes from the board, meaning the chair signs it. It's not from the director.
what section was that you just read, Julie?
Yeah, where are you?
It's the top of page 9, so it's section 14.
Are you reading the charter or the regulation?
Yes, I'm reading the charter.
Okay, so
14,
give me the section.
14H on page 9 of the charter.
Okay. My charter says page 64, so that's why I'm confused.
Oh, okay.
well, it's on page 8 of mine, so,
Oh, okay, well, that's not helpful then. 14H.
okay, 14H.
Yeah, it needs to come from the board.
Okay,
So,
So that goes in B and C.
well, how about if I say the director here send the board's findings to the chief of police?
I just don't think it's the director that sends it. I think it's,
Well,
I mean, maybe technically it's, I mean,
yes,
physically it's sent, but
because-
it's,
yes, because the chairperson is not going to do all this work and send it. I mean,
It's
this is what.
that's
this is
what the
your
staff is for. Yeah, that's what the staff is for.
but I just think it needs to say that, because again, this has come up before where we don't even see it. So, but that's another issue.
Well,
But-
basically, I mean, we don't change. If you agree, then what is sent is what you've seen.
Right, no, I'm talking actually, sorry, later on after a hearing, if a majority decides something. So it's a slightly different point in time about those of us on the panel not ever seeing the final decision and there not being a consensus about what's being sent, and it just comes from the director.
Okay, that's a
This is
different
kind
issue.
of a similar,
Okay, I see what you're saying, and we'll deal with that when we get there.
yeah.
Julie, we only change your findings.
but in this section, how shall it read? Because the charter does say that the board will send the findings.
Right.
So how shall we phrase this?
So for me, when the board sends the findings, one of the reasons why the staff exists is to support the board.
Yeah.
So to me, the staff writes up whatever, and I'm good with the chair signs it, like it's written from the board. And then the chair signs it and it goes off.
Right. So, but it should say the board shall send the findings to the chief of police.
Well,
And as a matter of fact, the staff will write it, but the chair will sign it. This is the way all memos to council and the chief coming from the board,
I agree.
signed by the
Kitty,
chair.
don't you think it'd make more sense for it to be the chair of the hearing panel?
Well, no, we're not at the hearing stage yet here.
Oh, I thought
I
she was
raised
in-
that, but that's premature.
No, we're not there yet.
We're
Oh,
talking
and so
about. the board.
she referenced J2, and that's after the hearing.
Who mentioned?
I thought Julie mentioned J2.
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
but we're
chart.
not there yet.
So I think we all agree that the staff will write the letter with the findings on behalf of the board, and the chair will sign that letter, and then the staff will send it off. I think we all agree to that, right?
Yes, but in the regulations, the words that need to be used are the words from the charter. That's all I'm saying. The staff will in fact assist in putting that together, but the chair will sign it and it will come from the board. So
Agreed.
I think B needs to say that the board shall send its findings to the chief of police.
Right.
Okay, but you understand that staff's doing this? I mean,
Yes.
Okay,
I understand. I'm just trying to be consistent here with what the charter's words.
sure.
And then the same thing
See.
under C.
And
Can we
do we
just
want to
say-
say findings or recommendations? In H in the charter, the language is recommendations. I don't think is a big deal, but
Yes, you're right.
Couldn't we just say the director on behalf of the board shall send these findings?
What difference does it make?
Well, what are we doing by saying the board shall send? Leaving it that way.
Because we're
I know we're trying to match up
To
the
the
charter, but if we
charter.
actually want to reflect what we're actually doing, we could just say the director on behalf of the board shall send findings.
But the
Whatever.
letter is signed by the chair, so that means that the letter is written from the board, because that's why the chair is signing it. So it's really, the letter that staff is writing is really the board's letter.
It's not going to be signed by the director, so it's not the director on behalf of the board.
It's the board's
Yeah, if you
letter.
don't want it that way, it's fine. Okay. Okay.
Is there
Anyway.
any difference between findings versus recommendation? just
I
wanna be
agree,
sure.
Mike. It probably should say recommendations.
Well, recommendations refer to disciplinary recommendations.
Ah,
But in the charter,
You know, I should.
At H it says
uh,
recommendation, so maybe
yeah,
that's,
H in the charter says recommendations.
Yeah, okay, but you're only gonna have a recommendation on a sustained finding.
okay. So you want to leave it at finding then?
So maybe it needs to be, you know, I got rid of it. There's no, it doesn't say recommendations up here in B, but it does in C, and I think that was an oversight on my part.
Okay. And in C is findings or recommendations.
Oh, did we?
Don't we want
I
it to
think
be
Byron
both?
and I talked about, would there ever be a case where you didn't want to sustain anything but recommend discipline? No, then that has to go to a
They
hearing.
can't. Yeah.
Never mind,
No.
never mind. We have to get rid of this.
Okay.
How's that look?
I'm confused, but maybe I'll just need to come back to it later.
Okay.
Aren't we modifying the findings and recommendation and recommendation?
Right, that's why I was kind of thinking we need to have that in there, don't we?
the recommendations are only for discipline.
Yeah.
Well,
There is
so
none.
far I have not seen, I
We
have not
modify
seen,
that?
I have not seen, at least somebody clarify, maybe I have, but I don't think I've ever seen finding and recommendations from the staff prior to a hearing that also recommended discipline. I don't remember ever seeing where they said, here,
Then you forgot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there have been.
For every sustained finding, we have recommended discipline. Now, we don't say the level of discipline because we
that's what
haven't
it
had
is.
that next category of serious.
okay, maybe that's what it is. Okay.
Kathy, under B,
Yes,
shall send its findings. You don't need the, right? Under
Right.
B, the last line, shall send its findings.
thank you.
Are we finished with this section?
Yes, I think so.
It looks good.
Okay, it only took us an hour.
Exactly.
Well, that's a tricky one.
It is.
Mike, you want to take over as chair?
No, you're doing a great job, Katie. I'd like you to proceed.
Thank you very much.
He has tomorrow night.
Okay.
Right.
He's taking a
All
break.
right. Moving forward, our next section is there anything we need to look at under 7? There's some red ink.
No, we've gone through this.
We've done
I have to, this is some city attorney issues here. These comments have been here a long time. So we did get all the way to J, but then we moved to informal complaints. Do we want to do that? I kind of think we should finish that up.
Yeah, because I'm still waiting on Lieutenant Montgomery to report back on how they handle anonymous complaints,
Oh, okay.
if he's still there.
Here he is.
Good memory.
Yeah.
All right. So I did get with the chief. We did recently, I think within the last year, add that language about accepting anonymous complaints. And, with that, I think there's a disclaimer on there that that can complicate things if we aren't able to contact somebody or recontact somebody. But with that disclaimer on there, we accept anonymous complaints. I think remember we were talking about guardrails, the guardrails that were proposed, considering the seriousness of whether you're going to sort of investigate a case, or when you're looking at the case and assessing whether you could get to discipline, given the lack of information, available information, like when did this happen, or that kind of thing, is going to trouble a lot of the cases, make a lot of the cases very difficult. But we accept them and then investigate them, try to find out what we can find out till they conclude, till they become too difficult, or there's no information available to get us where, for example, we can't figure out when the incident happened, or it was an unrecorded incident and that kind of thing. So some of them die for lack of assistance from the complainant in the investigation, but we accept them. So
what happens to those that you don't have assistance from the complainant, but there's enough to actually do an investigation based on the information that you receive? So you just complete your investigation?
we keep going. Yeah, we complete the investigation.
Lieutenant, were you able to think of or talk with the chief about additional guardrails that we might put under C?
Yeah, the discussion we had, I talked to her this morning, the discussion that we had about, that aspect of, we're not going to know who the person is, if the investigation can establish that they're people that are by rule allowed to make a complaint, that they're, in this case, currently recipient witness or aggrieved party, that we can establish that through the investigation, because there still is that concern out there from officers that there'll be a potential for somebody who is not party to this, was not the aggrieved party, and was not actually a witness, calling it out, are calling out an issue. Now, the flip side is we're concerned about the issue. So if an issue is called out to us, we're aware of it, we're going to run with it if the person wasn't available. Does that make sense? We become aware of an issue, we're going to deal with the accountability of the issue. It's more, the concern lies with what hopefully will become obvious, which would be the possibility for professional complainants, vindictive complainants, complaints that are frivolous or lack merit. Hopefully that will become obvious, but that's a big concern, is that's where that kind of complaint could live. And then the reason why I call out the issue of, is this a person who by the rules has standing to make a complaint in this process, is because what you wouldn't want to see is a person who does not have standing have this other avenue to that the other avenue sort of skirts their lack of standing. Does that make sense? Like they're calling from Tennessee because they saw a protest on the TV and they didn't like something that happened in the protest, and now we're sort of going down a rabbit hole on that, and that's not a person who could really make a complaint. So to me, maybe something about in those instances, how do we establish that person is a person with standing and make a complaint? Flip side is, Chief made it clear that if obviously we deal with so many of these that are a range of types of complaints, right? We don't deal with a lot of excessive force complaints or anything like that, but if serious complaints come to our attention, it's not going to matter how they come to our attention, we're going to investigate them, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that was I didn't, when I was thinking about this and proposing it, I think that the rest of the group here understood that this need not be the aggrieved party or even a percipient witness, that it could be any member of the public. However, we would weed out those complaints that were not serious, that were not timely, for which there was no prima facie misconduct, and so forth. And that was the reason for the guardrails. I mean, those kinds of guardrails don't exist for the formal complaint, precisely because the formal complainant is either the aggrieved party or a precipient witness. So those guardrails aren't so necessary. But in order to make sure that nothing frivolous or silly goes forward, we would have these guardrails.
The other question I had, I appreciate that. The other question I had was, it seems like that's why would you want to tie up a meeting with that and not have it be a staff function to help you weed those things out? Just out of curiosity, because
Yeah.
like, for example, I get people who call and they want to talk to a lieutenant. They've got what I wouldn't call a complaint, but I call it gripe. Things didn't go the way they wanted to go. They weren't illegal. They're not talking about misconduct. They want the officer to talk to. They want the officer to know how they felt about something, and then we kind of handle that kind of thing informally. If there's no sort of improper behavior on the part of the officer, we handle that informally. Just talk to the officer. That would be like an informal complaint to us. Or we get
Kind
people
of had
who,
the same thought about whether or not staff should do a preliminary screening.
So,
And where could we put that?
so that's
Yeah.
interesting in terms of that preliminary screening aspect. So there's like two
Yeah.
pieces to this. Like one is like the preliminary screening that in some contexts they do like a review to determine whether or not there's baseline sufficiency, factual sufficiency, subject matter jurisdiction, timeliness, kind of base factors. And then some of them get thrown out immediately. Some of them then might move forward to a quote unquote investigation. But there's that procedurally, but there's also what Lieutenant Montgomery is referencing in terms of standing. We want to think about that standard of standing and just have a conversation about it. Standing, of course, is a kind of a legal principle with regard to you have to have experience from a harm. The question is, though, with a public independent board, police accountability board, do we want to restrict standing to an individualization of standing in the sense that that person has had to experience the harm themselves in order to file a complaint? I think because it's an independent public, board, police commission board, the standing question is different here. So I want to make sure we vet that and just have a conversation about it. I totally understand what Lieutenant Montgomery is speaking about, but in the context of we're not a court in that sense, though we have quasi judicial properties, we're also an independent police review board. So standing is something we really need to be careful about and think about what that means in terms of application to our very specific charter amendment and also our mission. So,
well, what I'm talking about, if I'm using the wrong term, it's because I don't have a law degree, is that the rules that we're operating under right now say that who may make a complaint, and it says precipient witness or aggrieved party. And so if it's other than that.
So actually you talk as if you have a law degree, you're quite up on the law. So I'm very impressed actually. So that precipient witness thing, though, Lieutenant Montgomery, that doesn't mean necessarily, or aggrieved party is like a broad term. Aggrieved could be like you saw something terrible happen on the street, and quote unquote terrible, and you're now like, oh my gosh, that's an instance of police misconduct, but it didn't affect you directly. So that's in like traditional understandings of the law. It's not like you had harm yourself that you can then have standing on to file a complaint. So that's a more restrictive sense of standing is what I'm saying. So
yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, that maybe I'm using the word there incorrectly. But
well, it's very helpful
right
for
now
this conversation actually to understand how we move forward.
I appreciate it. I guess what I'm saying is the rules as they stand right now do limit, for example, is a person who reads something in the newspaper an aggrieved party or a precipient witness?
Right. So that's a good question. So that's a precipient witness from the perspective of like criminal cases, or civil cases. That usually means someone has like seen or heard something, not through like third party sources.
Yeah, you talked about it with the council. You said somebody who actually was there and experienced the incident. They saw or heard it themselves. They were an eye or ear witness, sensory witness.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we
well-
want to expand the definition here of aggrieved party or witness, because I think we were pretty clear for a formal complaint what we meant by aggrieved party.
Right.
It was the person who was directly injured, not physically injured, but aggrieved. So I don't think we want to revisit that. But the difference in this section is that a member of the public could provide information, communication to the staff and to the board, which, if we considered it timely enough and serious enough, I mean, we're talking serious excessive use of force or something, then the board itself might move forward with a board initiated investigation. If
So
the
under
person
an-
didn't want to file a formal complaint or was not the aggrieved party.
Yeah, so
So-
now we're making a distinction of different
There's
types
a
of, informal and non-necessarily aggrieved.
That's right. The reason it's called informal complaint, but it's kind of informal communication, which is, the definition under A. An informal complaint is a communication, not on the form.
Does it seem like that would lower the bar for the less actionable cases? Like basically you're saying that the bar is lower if you won't give us any information, if you won't participate through the process, you won't, that the bar,
has to be-
let's lower the bar.
I'm saying it would have to be a serious instance,
Okay.
potentially serious, and that there would have to be some minimal evidence for it.
Yeah,
And I agree that it would be good to put here somewhere that I don't know if we want to say that the staff can come to us and recommend closure or something, or if we just put that the staff can not bring all cases to the board, that it has to meet some threshold before they bring it to the board.
Maybe the factors that you have under C, we just say that staff shall review informal complaints and, based on the following, and then, something there, that these are the same factors that staff would be looking at, right?
Right.
So let me say this, because if the department itself accepts anonymous complaints, then the department is allowing complaints that may not be the aggrieved party or a recipient witness, because they're anonymous. So you don't know where they're coming up with it. Just like you said, they could have saw something on TV. So if the department is willing to accept that, then I don't see why there's constraints on the board being able to accept the same thing. And with, these guidelines around it, I mean, that's the same thing that the department is doing. You're saying you somebody brings it to you anonymously, you look into it, you determine whether or not it's something that's just frivolous. If it is, you don't do anything with it. If there's something pretty egregious that you need to follow up further, you do.
Right.
But there's some sort of investigation done. I also think that from the board's perspective, it shouldn't be a preliminary investigation. To me, it should be an investigation. Investigation means you go and you look for, try to find whatever facts, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And the findings and recommendation that come back to the board, the finding may be, this is frivolous. And so therefore we want the board to close this. So I think it should come to the board, even if it's frivolous. Honestly, one of the things it'll do as board members, it will allow us to see how many of those crazy things we're getting, how many things like that we are actually getting. It also, the board should be making the decision about, whether or not it's frivolous or whether they should be going forward. I don't think that we should say the staff can just review it and throw it out on their own. I think everything should come to the board.
So in other words, Cheryl, you're saying that we should leave C written the way it is, and with no, well, I mean, I tend to agree with you that we can, from what I have heard around the several places I've contacted that accept anonymous complaints, they don't receive many. So I don't think we're going to be inundated. I don't think that's a an issue. We'll may find out it is, but so you're saying that you believe that DPA staff shall agendize the informal complaint for a closed session, and then we'll determine whether to proceed based on these guardrails. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm
I
saying that.
thought you was- Go ahead. I didn't
No,
think that's
what I'm
what you were
saying is, this anonymous complaint comes to the staff. The staff does the investigation. That investigation may be very short. It may be, hey, this is frivolous, there's nothing for us to find, and that could be the end of it, right there. The staff may determine, you know what, I need to do a little bit more before I can make whatever determination. So to me, it's an investigation. There's no preliminary investigation there. To me, it's an investigation. Because there are going to be some sort of findings and recommendation. The finding may be this was frivolous. The finding may be, you know, hey, there's such and such a, allegation in it. So I think it should just be an investigation. It may, like I said, maybe short, but
Where does it say preliminary investigation?
somebody mentioned that there should be a preliminary investigation done to bring that to the board. And then the board decide whether or not a more detailed investigation should be done. To me, I don't think we need a preliminary investigation, just do the investigation.
I'm following you. I'm tracking. The big question to me seems to be, if I were putting those in order, whether it alleges misconduct, because we get a lot of, like I said, things that would probably be more like gripes than complaints. We also get people who are struggling with their own issues, and you know, I have people that I talk to for a half hour a week. You know, every time they run into police contact, they got to talk it out. And you know, sometimes, so I mean, when I think of informal complaints, and the way I was reading the original section was kind of thinking about those, where it's like somebody coming, they talk to an officer, they wish the officer would have arrested somebody for violating their belief system, but not violating a policy or doing some kind of wrongdoing.
So Lieutenant, on the third bullet point, is that not covered here, whether the informal complaint alleges misconduct?
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you were talking about, do they all need to come to the board? You might say, well, in the case where the DPA's office gets a informal complaint and the person is not alleging misconduct, game over.
I actually had this same thought about the priorities for these. Maybe that you include them, but that the third one should be the first one.
They're not in
Almost like a filter, right?
They're not in an order of importance. They're just there.
Yeah. So we can reorder them, but
They were
on
all
most
very good,
cases-
Byron.
But the
most-
prima facie misconduct, I mean, I
Should
think
come.
we do that now. So, I mean, we could probably lose that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that prima facie misconduct is kind of like a baseline standard that if the facts alleged were true and it were thus a quote unquote violation, then that's typically when you would conduct a quote unquote full-fledged investigation. We're not segregating from like an intake process and then into an investigation. We're doing it all at one time. But then we have to consider these factors of, you know, what is folks might eventually ask, what's a prima facie misconduct? That's basically if the facts as alleged were true and that this would thus be a violation, that's typically when you would conduct then an investigation. When you have that two-tiered system with an intake process at first and then an investigatory process. We don't have that here. In general, I'm not suggesting that we necessarily need to do that. But I think that's a very important part of that, those three bullet points.
Let's get rid of the third one. Are we in agreement? We'll get rid of the
Yeah.
prima facie. Let's
No, I don't agree.
Oh, no, we don't want to get rid of prima facie. Yeah.
No, that's the most important one.
wait. I thought there was, I mean, maybe I misunderstood. I thought that it
That's
was
the
a
best
suggestion
one.
that staff
That
would
should be the
review
number
these.
one. Number
Excuse me?
one.
Yeah, we're saying actually that's a priority, that if it were a prima facie case, Byron, that's something that then, okay, you take.
No, it's important. I thought I heard someone say we should leave that to staff and make an initial
see.
determination before we even get to this process.
That's
That would be
the
if
way
we
I
had a
envisioned it. I
two-tiered
think that's
system.
what you
So in
always.
other words, if Kathy and I get a complaint and we
Yeah.
look at it, there's no prima facie misconduct.
Yeah,
To us, under the old process, that would be a reject. It wouldn't even come to you.
right. You dismiss
Well, I
it.
think
And so-
Cheryl was saying, though, that it would be helpful for them all to come to us,
Well,
even
this-
if it's just a really cursory.
But that
This was-
preceded the point that was made about this prima facie misconduct. I just thought it was a good point. It's like, we
Okay.
do review these forms to see if someone
mean-
could come in there and say, I have a complaint against Fred Flintstone. We
Right.
don't want to bother anyone with that.
Mm.
We don't want to
But
waste
that is
anyone's
like
time.
that discretion is important for the staff. So we have to think about that carefully, because what if there are goofy, non-meritorious, which I think are going to be not necessarily very frequent, but what are we going to, do we
get
want to
them.
take the time up? Okay.
We do get,
Okay, but let me throw this out there. Let's say somebody's complaining about Fred Flintstone and staff says, you know what, we don't want to deal with Fred Flintstone because that's, whatever. But then this person comes to one of our board meetings and speaks out in public comment and says, I complained about Fred Flintstone, and we're like, what? We never heard about it. So, you know what I mean? Like,
and
at
then
the
you would,
same
and
time-
then you would talk to us and we would say,
Right. and
we
then
don't
we
take
say,
complaints
yeah.
against
fair
Fred
enough.
Flintstone.
That's just
Fair
kind of
enough.
life in 3D, right? It's like something's got to be resolved as they come.
So Kathy and Byron, so in other words, I didn't realize that there's sort of three tiers. One is the Fred Flintstone that you don't even bring to us. The other is things you bring to us for administrative closure, which is different from the Fred Flintstone. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Administrative closure cases, we have, most of those cases are going to have some form of minimal prima facie misconduct.
Right.
all right. Well, if we're going to give staff, that's nowhere in these regulations.
That's what I was just thinking. We need to spell that out if that's what's
That's not
happening.
under admin closure, Kathy?
No, it's not. It's not administrative closure. It's even less than that.
So that would be
You're
in
talking-
general
you're
for both
talking about
formal and
rejects.
informal.
Are you talking about rejects?
Yeah,
yes.
There's
That's
no-
not
Are
even-
you
that's-
saying that if a complainant says, I have a complaint against UCPD, that we have to bring that to you?
No.
No.
I'm just saying that I wonder if should be mentioned somewhere in the regulations that staff has the ability to
Dismiss or, yeah.
dismiss or,
Well, I wouldn't
Reject.
use the word dismiss. I would say, reject, I think, is the best term.
Reject
because
is the
It doesn't
term?
go anywhere.
Yeah.
oh, yeah, but it should be that staff may reject complaints that it finds to be completely frivolous or, something. But I agree, we should, because we weren't aware of that. So that should be in here somewhere, just a sentence, in
I
some
think
place in these regs.
I think that makes sense to have that there, or it could be confusing. Then everyone would think that, well, it has to go to an investigation process, like a full-fledged investigation process.
Yeah, I
But
think
that-
it makes sense to have some sort of reject.
Yeah,
something.
we could, should we deal with that later and just finish this?
well, I was thinking we need to put it in here somewhere under the informal
No.
complaints.
No,
No?
no, because they file on a.
It could be
complaint
formal
form.
too. So it could be
What?
formal or
They
informal.
file on our complaint form, so it's not informal.
I know, what I'm saying is, I thought that
Specific
we
to, yeah.
needed to put it under this informal complaint procedure, and then it occurred to me that we don't even have it under the formal complaint procedure. We need to put it there as well.
Oh,
But do
I
we need
see.
to deal with that now? Or should we need to finish this informal complaint process?
I know, but to finish the informal complaint process, we need to add something here about your ability to reject.
And then
Yeah.
make a note that we also need to have something similar elsewhere.
Exactly.
Or maybe there's just something prior to both formal and informal complaints that says that the staff will.
Procedurally,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be when it came in the door. So Kathy
Yeah,
and
something
Byron,
comes in the door, just rejects, and
where
then
in
we start
the,
talking about the other stuff. Because
then
there's
there
so many
would,
different categories. There's rejects, there's informal, and then there's formal.
And I
right?
still think they should be separated because we're talking here on this informal complaint process about complaints that have minimal prima facie misconduct, but they may be informal and or anonymous. we're just going off, I think.
But I think what we're saying is that the staff should have the ability
Oh, I agree.
to reject those. So we have to put it in there.
I would like
Yeah,
to.
I
put
agree,
in here-
but that's not
We
gonna
also have to
solve this
put it in
informal
there for the
complaint.
formal. We have to put something in there for the formal, or we have to put a section that says, prior to either one, any complaint submitted that's about Fred Flintstone, staff has the ability to reject it before it even gets to formal and
I
informal.
understand that, Cheryl. I understand it. I just, never mind. Not just, we should finish the informal complaint process and deal with the rejects later, but
Do we put
I
a
may be
pin-
missing something, so.
I wanted to put the rejects for informal complaints, since we're in this section now. I'd like to put one sentence
Yeah.
somewhere here that the staff has the authority to reject informal complaints that on their face have no merit.
Maybe that would be a B, right? A new B?
I think that makes sense. And then of course, then Kathy and Byron, if they want to, like, put a global section somewhere about staff ability to review and quote unquote reject, the Fred Flintstone cases. We want to be careful there too, to provide some wording on that. I'll leave that to you, but typically it's stuff like, okay, the allegations were so speculative or conclusory or incoherent that the PAB cannot infer blah, 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 infer a violation or infer something of that sort, like infer discrimination, for example, in civil rights cases. A speculative, conclusory, or incoherent tends to be the standard. And that seems to be a reference to that's going to trigger some questions about, is this serious?
So in section B, just so I'm clear, we're now dealing with formal complaints that lack prima facie misconduct.
Yes.
Right.
That's the issue I have. Because
So,
this entire section has to do with informal complaints.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to be able to, we want to have you be able to reject them if they lack.
No, I get it. I just didn't think it goes here, but
Okay.
you
It
think
would
it
just be a
goes here, Kathy?
reference to your global ability.
Help me understand, Byron, where do you think it goes?
Somewhere else, I don't know, but not here.
Maybe we could come up with a global clause, but for now, let's, we can come back to
Yeah.
that. It's just a concept we
And it's
need.
because we're talking about formally filed complaints. Like, that's my issue.
And so, Byron and Kathy, do you think there's a place, kind of procedurally speaking, in the time chronology of a complaint coming in the door, that you can then come back, not in this meeting, but if you want to, well, I think, it would be helpful to put up higher in this set of regs where you could reject complaints. So put it up somewhere in some section, and then this is just a reference back to that ability to reject complaints, including informal complaints.
Well, maybe right after this section, informal complaints.
You think afterwards?
Yeah.
Thinking globally earlier somewhere.
I was thinking maybe earlier, Byron, then that's earlier in the process, chronologically speaking.
I'm not really seeing a place, only because of the way we've structured the regs. Section 2 is formal complaints filed with the ODPA, and A is initiating a formal complaint.
Can I make a suggestion?
Mhm.
I think we all understand what we want to include.
Yeah.
And can we ask that the staff go back and find an appropriate place to put it? And that appropriate place may be in 2 different sections. It may be in its own section. But I think we all agree with what needs to be said. It's just where it needs to be.
That's
And I
right.
think
That's
we
right.
can let staff figure that out. And let's move
Thank
on.
you, Cheryl. Yes.
We could also do, just to add one other thought, it could be part of a definition, a frivolous complaint, say that you have the authority to reject frivolous complaints and then define frivolous in the definitions as whatever, just another possibility.
Yeah, my like 2 cents there again is like, when you do the frivolous complaint, if that's the language that we're going to use for rejections, you may need some more kind of categorical specificity, like speculative, conclusory, incoherent. That's just my 2 cents. If that doesn't sound right to you, that's fine too, but that's not uncommon, who, what,
Well,
when, where, how is.
conclusory, a lot of these things might be conclusory, so I don't think we want to reject something just because it's conclusory.
What about,
Sure, yeah, oh, go ahead, Kitty.
well, I don't see anything wrong by duplicating. If we have a statement under formal complaints, I think we could have a statement like Kathy has added here. DPA staff has the authority to reject informal complaints that lack. And then I would say that lack prima facie, that do not allege police misconduct. In other words, take some of the wording from the bullet point and put it up here. So I think that's what Lieutenant was talking about.
Yeah.
Right, that can work. Too.
And then we could also have a similar statement under in the formal complaint section. Because I think it's especially important to state it here because of officers' concerns. And it's okay if it's stated twice.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with that. How about fail to allege rather than
Okay.
That fail to allege.
That fail to allege prima facie misconduct. Yeah. Okay.
I would recommend we let staff come up with the wording because primarily because they actually receive those things already. They actually already reject. So they already kind of know what kind of qualities they're looking for in a complaint, and they probably could do a better job than we can of defining those things.
Yeah,
So
for instance,
I think that's a good starter language.
we reject complaints that are past the deadline,
Past it, so that's a
the
time limit.
filing deadline.
But you also reject the Flintstone complaints, right? Which they don't allege prima facie misconduct.
Those we bring for admin closure, actually.
Oh,
so-
well, that's good to know.
Oh, so you bring the Fred Flintstones to us?
Well, okay, define Fred Flintstone.
Well, I thought
It's Barney Rubble's big buddy.
I thought that you were just
Drive cars with their feet.
I thought that you were just telling us that you reject things without bringing them to us.
Yes, but not ones that lacking prima facie misconduct is a grounds for administrative closure. So we bring those to you.
Oh,
Here's what we reject. We reject if they're beyond the deadline, the filing deadline. We reject if they allege misconduct against somebody who's not a sworn officer of either a sworn officer of the department, because sometimes they'll want to file against a parking enforcement officer and we have no jurisdiction over them, or UCPD, as I said.
If they don't meet minimal filing requirements.
So we don't really
that
need
needs to be specified. We need to, assuming you guys agree that that's the way it should be, that needs to be in here, I think.
Well, I think it's clear that I think if that's the case, you bring us everything as long as it's not over the deadline and as long as it's not against someone who's not a sworn officer. A here says it has to be a member, identifies an officer.
Right.
And alleges an act of police misconduct. So, I think it's clear that if someone comes in and wants to complain about the mayor or something, that you're going to, it's not a police misconduct case. So you don't accept it.
I have taken phone calls from people who want to complain about the mayor.
Sure.
Anyway, my point is maybe we don't need
Maybe we
B.
don't need it.
It's still going to come to us, Catherine. Oh yeah, that's right, Kathy and Byron, and that's okay. You think there's not enough of them that would be not a good use of time of the PAB? And there's also a discretionary kind of question of discretionary authority for staff.
Let me ask this question.
Sounds like they don't.
let me just ask this question.
No,
How many complaints do you guys actually reject that we never see? What are we talking?
Thousands, very few, actually.
3, 4 a year?
Okay, so it's really not that much. So in terms of volume, it's not a big deal in terms of efficiency issue. But how about the other question, which is like staff discretion at the kind of very, very, very front end of complaints coming in? Would it make your jobs easier? And does it really need to then go into the PAB's kind of sphere of review and public transparency to see that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'm sorry. So with regard to at the very, very front end with like the Fred Flintstone type of cases, would it, number one, not only make your job easier to just take care of it at the front end, but would it also allow you to have a certain amount of discretionary authority as staff over those type of cases where it does not necessarily have to come before the board for our
Yes,
jurisdiction, which is like basically public transparency?
yes, I
Yes.
think that's a waste of everybody's time if we have to bring you a complaint that's filed against UCPD.
Yeah.
So the question is, what needs to be in the regs about these scenarios? What do we need to have
I
spelled
don't
out?
think
here?
anything needs to be in the regs about UCPD complaints or about, what was the other thing that you mentioned, Kathy?
I think
Beyond the filing
It's the
deadline,
mayor
because they
filing
just
deadline.
haven't, they
Filing
haven't met any, those are complaints that just don't meet the threshold. We
Yes.
define complaint as a declaration that alleges misconduct by a sworn employee of the Berkeley Police Department.
Right.
So, that's one way that they don't meet the threshold. And then a little further on, we say that they have, it must be filed within 180 days of the alleged misconduct.
So it's clear that you reject those that don't do those things.
Right.
I don't think we need any additional verbiage here to say so, because it's clear that if it's not a sworn police officer, that's not our jurisdiction.
But we don't need to say anything about staff doing an investigation because they're doing it automatically under A. Is that what we're saying? That we don't need to?
We don't need any additional language about how they're going to weed something out if it doesn't
Okay.
meet the.
So
I
let me just make
agree.
sure. Yeah, I think I'm in agreement there too. Just let me make sure I understand though. When you're doing a rejection for like a complaint against the UCPD or against the mayor, is that, what type of closure is that? That we are referencing them as rejections, but what are we actually under the definitions, under general provisions?
We're not
It's
referencing
not
them at all.
going, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. We just say, we write them a letter and say, we cannot accept your complaint because blank.
Don't
There
you
is
track
no
that
closure.
though, Kathy? Like
Yeah,
in
we
your
do.
end?
It's in the
Your
annual
annual
report. Yes,
report.
we
It's
do.
in the annual report.
Okay.
It's a closure, did you say?
No,
No.
It's not
reject.
closure because it's not an
Right, it's not
investigation.
gone into process.
Closure is when we bring it to you
Right.
for any number of reasons, but reject is, it just doesn't go anywhere.
So it's a
So-
rejection. Okay.
I
So
agree,
Kathy,
I agree with Kitty in the sense that it's already defined in the regulations as to what would potentially reject something. So I don't
Right.
think we need to put anything in the regulations because
Yeah.
staff already, you look at the regulation says you have to do it within X amount of days. If you don't, staff will just toss that out.
Right.
It says it has to be against a sworn member of the police department. It's not, staff will toss that out. I think the structure around that is already in the regulation.
Okay.
I
So
agree.
it
Still
doesn't
think
have
we
a
should
specific term. but
renumber
yeah.
those under C. Well, first it should be like 1, 2, 3, 4. But I think we should reprioritize them, even if maybe they aren't in priority. Usually, it's kind of good to list things in order of priority.
Yes.
Because if it isn't timely, we're probably not going to get it, right?
Let's put the third bullet point first, at the
Yeah,
very least.
and make it a 1.
Well, if it's not timely, we might get it because staff might bring it to us and say, hey, we don't have enough time. It made the, they got it in within X amount of time, but we don't have enough time to investigate it further because
Okay.
of the other deadlines.
I would still put probably the seriousness second.
I would too.
And then how do we define seriousness? Just kind of playing devil's advocate.
I think we just know it when we see it.
I'm going to hold you to that, Julie. Oh, wait.
Well, I had originally, when Byron and I were discussing this originally, I mean, working on it together, I had proposed certain types of, a death or serious injury or a excessive use of force or sexual misconduct. I had listed some things, and Byron, I thought very wisely, turned it into a generic kind of, we'll consider the seriousness of the incident.
Yeah.
I think
I
that's
like that.
better
Like
than
generic, yeah.
So that's, I think it provides some flexibility.
Right.
And also the board is still, if you look at that last sentence, section C, the board will consider these 4 considerations, but it's not exclusive. The board may have other considerations in making its determination of whether to accept this informal complaint. That's why the language is there in part on the following
part.
considerations.
Yeah, that's important. Okay, I would like to add an E here. I had proposed excluding the E that originally was there, but how about we just put an individual filing a complaint anonymously on an official DPA complaint form will be treated as an informal complaint. That's more or less what Byron had originally had. I just don't think we need the first sentence because I think it sort of confuses things.
Do we need that at all, what you're just saying?
I think Kit thought, Kit, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yes, because elsewhere the language says that a complaint must be filed on a formal complaint must be filed on the form. And it says an informal complaint is something that is not filed on the form. So, but if somebody has provided you with a written form and they didn't sign it, and you can't contact them because you have no idea who it is, to ask them, do you want to keep this anonymous? But it clearly is anonymous because you don't know who it is. And it is a serious matter, right? It meets the other criteria, then you wouldn't want to just toss it in the trash.
Right, I
For the
think that,
same reasons that the lieutenant said with their process, that if something is, if there's a serious problem, you want to know.
Okay. Can we do a time check?
Oh.
And speaking for Mike, because usually he's the one that says time check, it's 8:50. Can we try to be done at 9?
yes.
Yes, Kitty, so you wanted to read a complaint
I
filed?
thought, and here's my proposed wording. An individual filing a complaint anonymously on an official DPA complaint form will be treated as an informal complaint.
The individual or the complaint?
Okay.
It's mostly
Oh,
there. I like it.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
A complaint,
A complaint filed anonymously. Sorry, Kathy. So delete an individual, yeah. A
Which is
complaint
that?
filed anonymously on an official DPA complaint form will be treated as an informal complaint.
I like that.
shall be treated as an informal complaint?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it'll be subject to all those guardrails.
And just change anonymous to anonymously.
Can I suggest that under C, we have that potential complainant language that was kind of left over?
Yeah,
Can we say if DPA staff is unable to contact the individual, which we've already referred to the individual up in B, right?
yeah. Mhm.
Or if, I hate using the plural, but I guess these days, or if they declare their intention.
Well, I didn't like they because it's confused with DPA staff.
Good point.
I don't like they anyway, but if DPA says, let's get individual.
You
Yeah,
got to go back up to the,
I originally had used potential complainant because,
no, I remember, I know.
so A, Kitty, we didn't talk about.
yeah,
We love it.
I thought it was,
Well, I sent something and I want
Oh,
to see
yes,
what
you
your
did.
thoughts were on it. So,
Talk-
because we were looking for a different word from self-identified. So were you okay? I suggested just identified or anonymous. in
why
section
do
A.
we need, I just thought it was less awkward to say what an informal complaint is, and then say the individual may request anonymity.
Yeah, I like this. I thought it's good.
Who initiates the maybe request. Okay.
I like how you.
But if we
you-
said identified or anonymous, we don't need a second sentence, right?
Well, I think it's important to make a distinction between anonymous and confidential, which is what I did there with that last sentence.
I agree, because we all got tripped up on that ourselves, so
Exactly.
it's good to
Yeah,
spell
there was
it
a lot
out.
of conversation about that last time.
I understand, but did any of you read my email today?
Yes, I did, Byron.
Only you?
What time was it at? Sorry.
I do my homework, Byron. I do.
Kitty, you always do. So what I
read
said, so in
I
regards
read
to
it too, but
section
I had
A,
already printed out Kitty, so.
so in regards to section A, I wrote individuals who file anonymously do so out of fear of retaliation from law enforcement,
Oh, that's right.
not police oversight entities. I think for our purposes, we should define anonymous complaints solely as being anonymous to the BPD and the general public, and not unnecessarily complicate the complaint and investigation process. And I think if we just, I don't know.
First of all, it's always anonymous to the public. But I think we need to allow for the possibility that some people, perhaps unreasonably, but some people may still want not to have their name known to staff. I know you don't think that happens, Byron, but it might.
Yeah.
You know, we will never know if it happens because the people who don't want their name known don't come forward. I mean, it's kind of one of those.
I think it's, I'm willing to let that go if that's, you guys think that's important. I do think it is our job as oversight people, board members, staff, to, and maybe that's part of outreach, but we need to help people understand what it is to file, how safe it is to file. I have gotten those questions over the years, not often. And it's my job as your investigator to put the complainants at ease in the public, to tell them that, and as I told them many times before, since I've been here, I have not known of any instance with this department of anyone being retaliated against for filing a complaint with the PRC and now the DPA. And if that were the case, I tell them what their options are. We're looking at a far more serious complaint against an officers for retaliating. But I don't know, it just seems like we're just inviting people to give us these odd complaints that are going to be very difficult to investigate. And actually it's going to work against what they're trying to accomplish. That's my speech.
Okay. You're not intimidating, Byron. I'm sure you
Not tonight. I usually try to be.
I'm sure you put people at ease. Yes, Kit, I see your hand up.
So, we talk in terms of scenarios, of possible scenarios. And one of the things that I sort of picture as a possible anonymous complaint is from someone who, let's say, is the stepchild of a police officer, and feels so concerned about the possible repercussions that yes, not realizing how totally safe Byron is would really want to be completely anonymous and would be completely unwilling to be identified even to staff, because their personal repercussions, their concerns about retaliation are just extend beyond what would be, a concern for the public. So that was sort of the scenario that I have in mind when I think of, a letter slipped in under the door unsigned.
Mhm.
And again, a serious allegation. If it's not serious, you're not going to take it anywhere. So thank you.
Also, I also think you have to accept that some people, reasonable or not, feel uncomfortable with complaining about police officers.
Mhm.
Whether they should or they shouldn't is irrelevant. They do. And because they do, if you want to have a process that's open to those people that feel uncomfortable about it, you have to allow them to remain anonymous. That therefore you're allowing more members of the public to participate in this process. Granted, it may not be able to be a full and complete investigation because they want anonymity, but that's explained to them. But I think that you should allow them to do that. And like I said, whether it's reasonable or not reasonable that they should be afraid is to me is irrelevant. People.
Oh, and I didn't mean to re-argue the whole point about anonymous complaints in general. It's just about I have the issue with keeping keeping their identity anonymous from the oversight investigative staff. That for as an investigator, I just cannot imagine dealing with those kinds of complaints where I don't even know who this person is. Then you're talking about something else.
Yeah, but at the same time, Byron, people that don't participate in this process don't know what your connection is to the law enforcement side of things. They don't know. And they like I said, there are people that come forward. This is a formalized process. There's people that come forward and they're just afraid. They're just afraid. And they're afraid to walk into the door. They're afraid to give you the complaint. They're just afraid. Whether it's reasonable or not, I think is irrelevant. They are, and we have to accept that. And if we want this process to be open, we have to allow them to do this anonymously. I also believe that the department is thinking the same thing. That's why they allow anonymous.
Exactly.
So I think that we should allow it. I think you're right. I think that more than likely not, it probably won't have many, if at all, of anonymous, especially, if the staff is able to talk to the person. But I think we should allow it because I think it makes people feel safe to bring something forward.
Yes, I agree. And I think it aligns us with best practices as they've been delineated. And so.
Yeah, but Kitty, in your research, I understand you identified agencies that take anonymous complaints, but I'm talking about, did you find out whether or not the agencies themselves don't know the identity of the complainants?
Yeah, they're anonymous. Anonymous means that there's no name attached.
Right.
Confidential is what you're talking about, Byron, that you would know, but the police department wouldn't. So those places that I contacted accept anonymous complaints. That is, the person doesn't want to sign their name. So anyway, that's
Okay.
yeah. So are people more or less satisfied at this point with this page? Satisfied enough to take it? I'm sure there'll be further discussion
More or less.
at the PDB.
I'm okay with it.
It's 9:01, and so as chair, I'm proposing that we stick with our timeline. And maybe, I don't know if we need to continue recording as we discuss the date for the next meeting. There was some suggestion we should discuss the date for the next meeting at this meeting. So I understand next Tuesday doesn't work for people.